problem for Julie Jensen in the fall of 1998 was with her marriage. But before we talk about that time, the fall of 1998, I want to go back to 1990 and to 1991 in the months after David, her oldest, was born. Now, that's a big transition time in a marriage, the time before kids and the time after kids. And it caused some issues in the Jensen marriage. Julie felt that the defendant was not involved enough with David, not supportive enough. And she had returned to work part-time after David's birth. And that was a difficult transition too. And Julie Jensen during that time was suffering from some postpartum depression. And she went to a psychotherapist. She saw the psychotherapist for about a year. She was prescribed an antidepressant. And the defendant also went to this psychotherapist several times too, because the therapist felt it was useful to see both the Jensens, and these sessions lasted about a year. So in this trial, if you hear about Julie Jensen's history of depression, that this is a suicide because she had a history of depression, well, that's it. The postpartum depression and seasonal affective disorder, when the seasons change, like fall, that she was treated for 1 year in 1990 to 1991. Julie Jensen did not have a history of suicide attempts. She did not have suicidal ideation. She had no suicide plans. And what a therapist is supposed to do, what you'll hear in the evidence, is ask someone, if they have signs of depression, to ask that person about risk of suicide. At no time did Julie Jensen ever say she was contemplating suicide. And in fact, she would cite her children. She could never do it because of her kids. And that's what happened in 1990 and 1991. And so the detective sees these work emails, but he sees they're not just emails between coworkers. These emails are full of sexual innuendo, and it's obvious that these people, during the fall of 1998, they were in a relationship. They were having an affair, because Kelly ended up getting married too in that time period. In fact, in one of these emails from October of 1998, the defendant refers to Carli McNeill as his girlfriend. And they end the emails frequently, almost all the time, with IDLY. I do love you. So within a few months after Julie Jensen's death, the police are aware of this affair, the motive. And the detective sits down with the defendant in April of 1999, so a few months after Julie's death. And as this investigation is continuing, the detective, who has seen these emails, asks the defendant about Carli McNeill. And the defendant lies. He says before Julie's death, they were just co-workers and friends. He had only seen her a few times. They weren't in a relationship. And even at that point, in the spring of 1999, he wouldn't describe them as dating. It's a lot of hemming and hawing about what he wanted to call them. And he certainly didn't want to admit to having this affair. Now, in this trial, I expect the undisputed evidence is going to show that the defendant was in the midst of an affair with Carli McNeill when he killed his wife, Julie. Now, Julie was a perceptive person, and in the fall of 1998, she noticed changes in her husband. She knew that something was wrong. Something had changed after her husband had started this new job at Stiefel Nicholas. And she even suspected that maybe there was another woman, maybe her husband was having an affair. You heard about Carli McNeill being referred to as Mark Jensen's motive. Now it's time to get to Mark Jensen's mistake. And that person is Ed Klug. Ed Klug is Mark Jensen's mistake because on a drunken night, the defendant revealed to Ed Klug before Julie's murder that he was looking on the computer for ways to kill his wife. Mark Jensen knew Ed Klug because they both had moved to Stiefel Nicholas in 1998. Mark Jensen had joined the firm earlier, and he was actually involved in helping open Ed Klug's branch in Appleton. In fact, Kelly Labonte was there too. And so Mark Jensen actually wasn't so helpful in opening that branch, according to what Ed Klug saw. And so then they know each other from that, and they end up together at a big conference. You're going to hear about this conference that took place in St. Louis in early November of 1998, so before Julie's death, the big company conference. And Mark Jensen and Ed Klug, they know each other, but they both recently joined this company, so they don't know a bunch of people. And so they end up hanging out in the hotel. And at first they are with a bunch of people drinking, but then the hotel clears out. It's basically even past bar close time. And they've been drinking together and talking, and they engage in some wife bashing, so to speak. And so during this conversation, when Mark Jensen had been drinking, the defendant told Ed Klug that if you want to get rid of your wife, that you could go to websites that would tell you how to poison your wife, how to kill her, and it wouldn't be detectable. You could use things like Benadryl and Antifreeze,